Now comes the hard part: how to organize the damn thing. Most people embarking on a memoir are paralyzed by the size of the task. What to put in, what to leave out, where to start, where to stop, how to shape the story. The past looms over them in 1,000 fragments, defying them to impose on it some kind of order. Because of that anxiety, many memoirs linger for years half written or never get written at all. What can be done? You must make a series of reducing decisions. For example, in a family history, one big decision would be to write about only one branch of the family. Families are complex organisms, especially if you trace them back to several generations. Decide to write about your mother's side of the family or your father's side, but not both. Return to the other one later and make it a separate project. Remember that you are the protagonist in your own memoir, the tour guide. You must find a narrative trajectory for the story you want to tell and never relinquish control. This means leaving out of your memoir many people who don't need to be there, like siblings. One of my students in a memoir class was a woman who wanted to write about the house in Michigan where she grew up. Her mother had died, the house had been sold, and she and her father and her 10 sisters and brothers were about to meet at the house to dispose of its contents. Writing about that task, she thought, would help her to understand her childhood in the large Catholic family. I agreed. It was a perfect framework for a memoir, and I asked her how she was going to proceed. She said she was going to start by interviewing her father and all her brothers and sisters to find out how they remembered the house. I asked her if the story she wanted to write was their story. No, she said. It was her story. In that case, I said, interviewing all those siblings would be an almost complete waste of her time and energy. Only then did she begin to glimpse the proper shape of her story and to prepare her mind for confronting the house and its memories. I saved her hundreds of hours of interviewing and transcribing and trying to fit what she transcribed into her memoir, where it didn't belong. Remember, it's your story. You only need to interview family members who have a unique insight into a family situation, or an anecdote that unlocks a puzzle you were unable to solve. Here's another story from another class. A young Jewish woman named Helen Blatt was very eager to write about her father's experience as a survivor of the Holocaust. He had escaped from his village in Poland at the age of 14, one of the few Jews to get away, and had made his way to Italy, to New Orleans, and finally to New York. Now he was 80, and his daughter asked him to go back with her to that Polish village so she could write about his early life and write a story. But he begged her off. He was too frail, and the past was too painful. So she made the trip on her own in 2004. She took notes and photographs and talked with people in the village. But she couldn't find enough facts to enable her to do justice to her father's story, and she was deeply upset about that. Her despair hung over the class. For a few moments, I couldn't think of anything to tell her. Finally, I said, "It's not your father's story." She gave me a look that I still remember as it dawned on her what I was saying. "It's your story," I told her. I pointed out that nobody has enough facts, not even scholars of the Holocaust, to reconstruct her father's early life. Too much of the Jewish past in Europe has been obliterated. If you write about your own search for your father's past, I said, you'll also tell the story of his life and his heritage. I saw a heavy weight drop off her shoulders. She smiled a smile that none of us had seen before, and said she would get started on the story right away. The course ended, and no paper was handed in. I called her, and she said she was still writing and needed more time. Then, one day, A 24-page manuscript arrived in the mail. It was called Returning Home, and it described Helen Blatt's pilgrimage to Plinsa, a small rural town in southeastern Poland that wasn't even on the map. 65 years later, she wrote, I was the first member of the Blatt family the town had seen since 1939. Gradually making herself known to the townspeople, she found that many of her father's relatives, grandparents, uncles, and aunts were still remembered. When one old man said, "You look just like your grandmother Helen," she felt an overwhelming sense of safety and peacefulness. This is how her story ends. After I returned home, my father and I spent 3 straight days together. He watched every minute of the 4-hour video I made as if it were a masterpiece. He wanted to hear every detail of my trip. Who I met, where I went, what I saw, what foods I liked and disliked, and how I was treated. I assured him that I was welcomed with open arms. Although I still have no photos of my family telling me what their faces looked like, I now have a mental picture of their character. The fact that I was treated so well by complete strangers is a reflection of the respect my grandparents earned from the community. I gave my father boxes of letters and gifts from his old friends, Polish vodka and maps and framed photos and drawings of Plinsa. As I told him my stories, he looked like an excited child waiting to open his birthday present. The sadness in his eyes also disappeared. He looked jubilant and giddy. When he saw his family's property on my video, I expected to see him cry, and he did. But they were tears of joy. He seemed so proud, and I asked him, "Daddy, what are you looking at with such pride? Is it your house?" He said, "No, it's you. You have become my eyes and ears and legs. Thank you for taking this trip. It makes me feel as if I've gone there myself." Let's look back at that first paragraph that we read, which was paragraph 22. Zinsser said a lot of information about how to organize your memoir. In that third paragraph that we read today, he said, you must make a series of reducing decisions. So if you haven't already, that's something that you might want to underline. And it continues, remember that you are the protagonist in your own memoir. It's supposed to look like a highlight. It doesn't quite, but on your page, that's something you're going to want to highlight. Remember that you are the protagonist in your own memoir, the tour guide. Right? So it basically just tells you that you're the main character. And you don't have to keep everybody in the story. Right? He continues to tell a story about a person from his class that was writing a memoir and how she realized at some point she didn't need to interview all her family members because it was her story. And in this information, he tells the student, it's your story. And as we continue reading, there's another story from a person from his other class. And he tells her the same thing. It's your story. So just keep that in mind as you take down your information and make your annotations. Remember, you also should have circled any unfamiliar words you didn't know and underlined any new information we learned about characters in the text.